Hello, psychology class. Oh my gosh, I'm sure you missed me. Hey, okay, so for the AP exam this year, I'm going to do some review lectures. Here's how what I want you guys to do and how I want you to do it. So hopefully these lectures, first of all, should be complete review. So we talked a lot about the relearn process, but you guys know this stuff, or at one point you did. That's the whole point behind mastery, is when I make you master the content at the time. When we go to relearn it 4 months later, it's not as difficult as learning it the first time. So hopefully as you listen to things and during these lectures, it's kind of review for you, not kind of, but it is review for you, or you can have those, oh, that's right, I know this stuff. I want you to keep telling yourself throughout these lectures, I know this stuff. I knew this stuff. I will know it again. I am fully confident that every single one of you will pass this test. So when you listen to these lectures, first of all, I want you to just listen. Don't write. Put them on while you're cleaning your room or doing something else. Just listen to the review. And they should be shorter than the other ones, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail. I'm just going to get your brain back to where it was a couple months ago when you really knew this content. If you do have your notes with you, you can follow along and kind of look at the things you highlighted, look at those summaries, those interactions. And then after each unit, I want you immediately to go quiz yourself on Quizlet just for this unit. So we're going to start with units 1, 2 on introduction and stats and those things, and then go to the unit 1 on Quizlet and quiz yourself. All of this is posted on this review website. I do want you guys to put off that you've completed it so I can kind of keep track of who's reviewing, and then we'll repeat for each unit. I'm going to try and clump up a couple of the small units together, and the large ones I'll keep separate. The big cram session will be the Sunday before your test. Monday, May 4th is your test, so Sunday the 3rd will be our review from 4 to 7. Your test is at 12 p.m. the next day. All right, so let's get started. Let's start with our Unit 1, looking at the history of psychology, its history and approaches. This is basically a review of our entire year. So remember that there is a need to view psychology in different ways. We're going to look at the history of it and then review the contemporary. So there's like 7 different perspectives that we looked at. Remember, psychology is the science of behavior. That's it, the science of behavior. We're looking to scientifically classify our behaviors, our observable behaviors. The history of it, remember, this is nothing new. The pre-scientific, there's the Greeks, Plato, Aristotle. There was people that believed that we were born the blank slate, right? So John Locke, the tabula rasa, the blank slate, that means that everything that happens to you is from your environment. So your environment completely defines who you are, versus people that thought that there's an inborn nature, right? So Descartes, Bacon, those were our old philosophers. And remember, empiricism, this word right here, empiricism, that became the scientific nature of psychology. So remember, so the pre-scientific, it used to be more philosophy, and then it went to more of a science, right? So psychology is considered a science. So remember, the first really scientist for psychology was Wilhelm Wundt. Remember that he was in Germany. He's the one that looked at the reaction time. This is where the science was born. So Wilhelm Wundt. Remember that his protege was... There we go. Oh, nope, I'm going to go next. William James. So remember, James is in America. Wilhelm Wundt was in Germany. So let me go back. So he's the one that first made it a science. Okay, and then we had Tishner. Remember, we talked a lot about the difference between structuralism and functionalism. Tishner is the one that dealt with structuralism, looking at how things were built. Functionalism is going to look at how you interact in your environment. So structure, how something's built; function, how something functions within the environment. So now let's go to William James. So he's an American. Remember, we talked about Jamestown. So William James, he was the second person, more scientific. He looked at functionalism. The other name that gets brought up a lot with him was Mary Calkins and Margaret Washburn. They were, again, in America, looking at how someone functions within their environment. So more of behaviorist, right? So functionalism is looking at behavioralism. Experimental psychology, so hence is born experimental psychology. You have to have an experiment with all those different components we'll talk about in just a moment before you can actually say this causes that. And we're also going to talk about Sigmund Freud. Remember our freaky Freud. We'll go into behavioralism, Watson and Skinner, and their boxes. Remember, they said that you can only record things that you can see. So behavioralism, how you can study observable behavior. And then we're going to, look at a little bit of humanistic. Remember, hippie humanism, looking at Maslow, touchy-feely, Carls and Roger, the pyramid of needs, and we'll look at those more in depth in those unit. And then cognitive neuroscience, remember CogCap, remember our thinking cap. Cognition means thinking, so how the way that our thoughts affect the way that we behave. And again, going back to that, the definition, psychology is the process of, or the science of, behavior and mental processes. All right, so let's go into contemporary psychology. So that's new psychology. That was basically our whole year, all those 10 units that we went over. The huge debate of nature versus nurture, you will see this on your exam. You will know it. Nature, what you're born with, right? So what you're born with. Nurture, meaning the environment that comes around. Which one decides who you are? Remember that there's no definite answer to that issue, but that you need to know that nature's your DNA, your biological, nurtures your environment and everything around you. Remember that Charles Darwin, right? He'll definitely be tested you. He thought that it was your environment. He's the one that thought natural selections, that the traits that you have, how they interact in your environment. So there's people that believe a nature point of view versus a nurture point of view, and we'll go through those when we go through those certain subtopics. Remember that at every single thing that we analyzed, we did the biopsychosocial chart. So here it is. Oh my gosh, did you miss this chart? So when we're looking at the thing in the middle, we look at, okay, my biology. What is my nature point of view? What's the DNA? How am I built? Psychology, that's your cognitive. And then the social part. The social part is the bottom, is how the environment around us affects those social norms. Here are the listed perspectives that we went on throughout the year. So our next lecture will go over biology. Evolutionary, remember that's talking about your environment. Psychodynamic, psycho, freaky Freud. Behavior, cognistic, human, hippiness, and then cultural, social cultural. Those are our units. So we will not go through those right now. We'll keep those for later. Remember, though, that when we're making psychology a science, we have to have some basic type of research that goes along with it. It needs to be a scientific method. We looked at these type of things right here, the developmental, educational, and personality and social, as part of a basic research, meaning there's not a lot of tests that go along with these, that it's research-based, but we still look for correlations, causations. Education, personality, development, and social is research-based, okay? Applied research, then, these are when we take the research and we apply it to make a difference, I guess, in the community. Remember, industrial, that's looking at being at a job and what makes people effective. Human factor psychology, we talked about the factors, the 5 factors. Counseling, clinical, and psychiatry. Remember that the psychologist does not need a doctorate, the psychiatrist does. This is a person that can prescribe drugs. And then counseling, this can be anywhere, like in schools or just marriage, things like that. Clinical psychology is a little bit more advanced, looking at treating something that's wrong. Okay, so here's our research method. Big review on the scientific method. All right, so here's talking about why we need it. This is you guys right now, hindsight bias and overconfidence. So remember hindsight bias, the need for, I knew it all along. Oh, I was going to choose D. I just accidentally chose A. No, you're wrong. The hindsight bias means is when we look back, we actually think that we thought something different than what we know. So this is why we need psychology, right? Overconfidence. Together with hindsight, it can lead to overestimation. So overconfidence in something, meaning that you feel like you could do something faster than you actually could. For those of you watching this lecture the day before the exam, you are overconfident that you could squeeze it all into one time period. And now you've got 6 hours to cram. Hopefully that's not you. Scientific attitude, don't need to talk about. Critical thinking, we don't need to talk about. Let's go into our scientific method. Okay, remember that a theory is more than a mere hunch. When we say, oh, I have a theory that he likes me, that's not what scientists use theory for. Remember, theory is based up with evidence. You can have a hypothesis that can be confirmed or refuted, meaning that I think that people will not be able to taste the difference between Skittles when they're blindfolded. That's a hypothesis. Remember, your operational definition is how you will measure it. OD, how I will measure, operational definition. And then remember that a good experiment must be able to be replicated and repeated in order to have validity. Here's the what's it called, cycle. As a good theory, remember it helps us predict things in the future, and it has evidence to back it up. Okay, if we can't do the scientific method, remember there's a couple things that we can do to get around the scientific method and still get some information. Case studies, that's when you observe one person, usually something odd, someone that lost a part of their brain and still living. Diseases that aren't very common, those are case studies. Think of like a single case and studying it for a long period of time. Remember that you can't generalize these to the general population. A survey, if I just want to gain anonymous information, when we put surveys all at once and I can survey the entire student body, but there's some things that can go wrong. Remember when you prime someone, or the wording effects, and we'll talk about random sampling versus representative sample. Remember that you have to randomly sample. Everyone has an equal chance of getting that survey, and that a representative sample means that I want the population to be represented with my survey. So if I have 30% seniors on campus, I want 30% of my surveys to go to seniors. Here's my sampling I just talked about. My population is the group of people that I'm going to be choosing from, a random, equal chance every person gets the survey. Naturalistic observation, remember you sit back and you naturally observe. Easy vocab. You're just describing the behavior. You're not trying to do any causation to it. You're just looking at the freshmen and how they interact during second lunch. Super exciting. This is where I get my correlation. Oh my gosh, I heard someone say this morning, Emily, that correlation does not equal causation, and it made my heart happy. Remember that a correlation is when I'm looking at how closely two things create each other. So does the amount of coffee I drink correlate to my efficiency, right? How does one thing affect the other? How does A predict B? Positive and negative. Positive moves in same directions. Negative moves in opposite. As I increase my coffee, I increase how fast I talk, obviously. As I decrease my coffee, I decrease how fast I talk. As I increase the amount of coffee, I decrease the amount of sleep. So that's going to be my negative correlation. Positive goes in the same direction. We look at correlation and the correlation coefficient. Remember, it goes from -1 to +1. Positive, negative doesn't mean a good or bad. It just means how strong. A 1 is the strongest I can have. 0 is my weakest. We look at correlation with the scatter plot. No correlation, right? I can draw a line of best fit. I'm sorry, not no correlation. A weak correlation because there's a lot of scatter. But I can draw a line of best fit. It's done here, right? And that means like it all happens here, and then I draw a general line that gives me a slope that'll give me my correlation coefficient. Here is a 0 correlation, right? There's no relationship. I cannot draw a line of best fit. If you look down here, 0 correlation. Here is a positive perfect slope going this way, positive. Here's a negative correlation. As one goes up, the other goes down. And remember, everything in between just means the closer it is to 1, the stronger. Closer to 0, the weakest. It helps us predict, but does not show cause and effect. Does not show cause and effect. Remember, that can be one or the other. It could cause, or like Suze talked about, low self-esteem could cause depression. Or you could be depressed and that causes low self-esteem. So even though they're correlated, doesn't mean they cause each other. There are something called illusory correlations. That's where there's a perceived correlation, but that might be a random coincidence. In 1980, the amount of cats increased in the United States, and also the amount of TVs purchased. Does it mean that having a cat makes you buy a TV? Not always. It might, but it doesn't always mean that one causes the other, even if there's a correlation. So an actual experiment looks to actually prove that one thing causes the other. Here are your experimental designs. It shows cause and effects. It's the only way to show cause and effect. That's often tested on. What's the only way to show cause and effects? Experiments. Remember, random assignment is once I've randomly sampled, then I randomly assign groups. That means that every single person has the equal chance of being assigned, whether that's the placebo, control, or the experimental. Remember my blind. So if it's a single blind, the participants don't know, but I do. If it's a double blind, I don't know who's assigned and they don't know who's assigned. Remember that the double blind gets rid of any type of bias. The placebo effect, always tested on. Remember, my placebo means that I think I'm getting something that I'm not. I think I'm taking a drug for depression, but I'm actually taking a sugar pill. Placebo effect is looking to get rid of all those bias. Remember that my experimental group is the one that's actually getting or receiving the treatment, and they're compared to my control group that does not receive the treatment. This is different from the placebo group. So the control group is just the people that aren't getting it. My experimental group is getting it. My placebo group thinks they're getting it. Okay? Remember that my IV is the one that I am changing. It's the one that's being altered. The DV is the one being measured. The dependent variable is the one being measured. Independent one is the variable being changed. Confounding variable is anything that could randomly affect my experiment that I don't have control over, right? How much sleep people got might be a variable that affects my results, but that I can't control. Remember that So here's just an example. Experimental group is getting breast milk, the control is getting formula, and I'm measuring the intelligence. Descriptive correlational, the types of stats. So remember statistical stats, these are my everyday mean, mode, median. Mode is the most occurring. Remember the median, like in the middle of a street, is the middle. It's the average, right? And the mean is the average. The median is the middle, like in the middle of the street. And then my mean is how I average it. So this is looking at income per family. So look, even though the most occurring score is 40,000, I have one huge outlier over here of someone that makes 1.42 million. So that brings my mean up to 140,000, even though most people make around $40,000 in their household. We can look at these with measures of variability, range and standard deviation. Range is looking at how far, so this is a huge range, right, from 30 to 1.42 million. And standard deviation is how far away from the norm it is. Remember, you will not have to calculate, but you will need to somehow apply it. So remember that when I'm describing it, you have to know these numbers. When I'm describing a normal curve, remember that the average, right, is at 0, and then my z-scores we'll talk about here in a second. Remember that 68% of people fall within one standard deviation of the norm, right? So 1 plus 1 minus 1. And then I have 13.5 added to both of those sides, so 95% of people fall within 2 standard deviations of the norm curve. And then I get my really extremes over here, my 4%. We'll work on memorizing these numbers. You will perhaps have to draw this curve, so make sure you understand that, and we'll talk about more that Sunday before. Remember, then I can make inferences from my statistics. The more cases I have, the better. Remember, if it's statistically significant, that means that the averages are reliable, the differences are relatively large, and that does not imply the importance of the results, just means that it's statistically significant. And then my questions about psychology. Applied psychology, we're going to look at ethics a little bit more. Remember that there's that ethics committee, that the huge case you need to know for ethics is Milgram's, and there's some different rules that apply to animals. Remember that, like, my ethic cases, I don't think I listed out, but that in ethics, the people have to be debriefed afterwards. They don't have to know what's going on during the experiment, but there has to be informed consent. They need to acknowledge that they'll be part of an experiment. You can't harm people, and then you have to maintain confidentiality, meaning that nothing can leave. There's no names associated to it. They often give you like a study, and then they say what ethics rule was broken, and then remember that all participants have to be debriefed after. Okay, so that's it for scientific review. That's kind of the big first huge unit, looking at history and then also the experiment. This makes up about 15% of the test. So that's it for our first review. The next lecture will go into biological bases with all our brain parts and all those good fun neurons. Remember, you can comment back on the website if you have any questions. Just let me know. Again, hope you've just been listening and being like, yes, I know this. Oh my gosh, she talks so fast. I will see you guys very soon.